The sun bled orange across the edge of the sky, casting a dying glow on the ragged town of Dry Creek, where buildings leaned like old men and the wind kicked up the kind of dust that settled deep in bones. No one came to Dry Creek anymore, not unless they had nothing left to lose. Jack Colton rode in slow, his boots thick with the dust of 5 states, his face shaded under a broad-brimmed hat pulled low. His horse, Dusty, carried scars of its own. Both rider and beast shared that quiet, hardened look of men who'd seen too much and spoke too little. The townsfolk watched from behind saloon curtains and chipped porch rails, whispering, "There goes that Colton fella. Isn't he the one who lost his wife and boy in that fire back east? Paid a single $1 for the old McBride place, they say. Must be mad." And perhaps he was. The McBride ranch had been vacant for near 2 winters ever since the widow stopped coming into town. Rumors said it was curse-haunted by ghosts, outlaws, or worse. But Jack didn't believe in ghosts. Not the kind others feared, at least. He tied Dusty outside the old land office, its sign hanging by one nail, and stepped in. A bell rang above the door, startling the old clerk dozing behind the desk. "You sure you want it?" the man asked, sliding across a single worn paper with a faint blue stamp. "Whole place is falling apart. No roof on the barn. No deed record for the last tenant. Locals won't go near it." "I said I'd take it," Jack replied. His voice was gravel dragged through whiskey. The man shrugged and nodded. "Well then, $1. Jack pulled a silver coin from his coat pocket, turned it once in the light, almost reverently, and placed it on the desk. "Sold." He left, with the deed tucked into his coat and a saddlebag full of canned beans, bullets, and silence. It took a half-day's ride to reach the ranch. The trail narrowed with every mile, the land stretching wide and empty, littered with memories of better times. Fence posts broken and sun-bleached. A windmill spinning lazily, half its blades gone, and then he saw it perched on a low hill, backed by twisted cottonwoods and framed by a rust-colored sky. The McBride ranch. It was worse than he expected. The house sagged like it was grieving. Paint peeled down to naked wood, and the barn sat in pieces like an exploded rib cage. But the land, the land. The soil was dark and still smelled of promise. He dismounted slowly, eyeing the house. Something wasn't right. There was smoke curling faintly from the chimney. Jack narrowed his eyes. He moved toward the porch. Boards creaked under his boots. Then he saw them tiny handprints in the dust, small, multiple, a boot print beside them, woman size. "What in hell?" he muttered. He raised a fist and knocked on the door. Silence. He knocked again, harder this time. The door flew open. Young woman stood before him, no more than 30, maybe younger. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun. Her face was streaked with soot and sweat, but her green eyes burned like wildfire. In her hands, a rifle, aimed straight at his chest. Behind her, 5 children of varying ages, frozen in place like deer in tall grass. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice hard as Dry Creek stone. "I could ask the same," Jack replied, lifting both hands, not reaching for his gun. "Name's Jack Colton. I just bought this ranch." She blinked, lowered the rifle an inch. "You bought it?" "For $1, he said. A pause. Then one of the children, a freckled boy of maybe 7, squeaked, "Mama, does that mean we have to leave?" She turned her head sharply. "Hush, Jamie." Jack's mouth twitched. "You McBride?" She shook her head. "Eleanor." "Eleanor. May Harper, my husband. He was promised this land by the banker before the crash. The papers were never finalized." "He's not here now," Jack said quietly. "No," she replied, voice suddenly hollow. "Buried out back. Fever took him last spring. He died trying to keep this place alive." Jack stared at her for a long while. The children stared back. A girl no older than 5 clung to her mother's skirt. The oldest boy, around 13, stepped forward and stood between Jack and his family like a guard dog. Jack tipped his hat back, jaw tight. "I didn't come here to throw out a family." She eyed him warily. "But you paid for it." "Don't." "Mean I expected company." He paused. "Or 5 young'uns and a rifle in my face," she exhaled, lowered the weapon fully. "We've been living on root stew and prayers. No one came this way in months. Figured it was ours again, till now." Jack stepped off the porch and looked out at the land. The wind tugged at his coat like it wanted to whisper something he couldn't quite hear. "You got names?" he asked without turning. She hesitated. Then, "Eleanor." "That's Grace, Jamie, Ben, Ruthie, and Samuel." The boy who had stood protectively in front of her lifted his chin. "I'm Samuel. I ain't scared of you." Jack gave him a side glance. "Good, you shouldn't be." A silence stretched between them, weighted but not sharp. "Listen," Jack said, finally facing her again. "I didn't come here to fight. I just needed a place to start over. Didn't figure on a family already doing the same." She folded her arms. "What now, then?" Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "You can stay for now, but we'll figure this out. And if we don't?" she asked, her voice taut. Jack looked at the children, at their bare feet, at the hunger in their eyes, and at the fight still burning in the widow's gaze. "Then I reckon the land will decide who it belongs to." He turned and walked toward the barn, or what was left of it, leaving the door open behind him. The widow watched him go, unsure whether she'd just been spared or challenged. Inside, Jamie whispered, "Mama, is he gonna kick us out?" Eleanor stared into the setting sun, her voice quiet as the wind. "I don't know, baby." But he didn't look like the kind of man who takes from folks. He looked like the kind who already lost too much. And somewhere out in the fading light, Jack Colton set down his saddle, tied Dusty to a broken post, and sat down under a sky full of stars. He didn't know it yet, but the ranch he bought for $1 just became the most costly deal of his life. The morning sun slid slowly across the floorboards of the old ranch house, casting golden lines through cracked windows patched with cloth. Roosters didn't crow here, too few animals left alive to bother. But the sounds of children stirring, rustling, blankets, quiet feet on wood, muffled whispers filled the air. Eleanor stood at the stove, coaxing heat from a reluctant flame, her brows furrowed and jaw set. Her fingers moved quickly, measuring with instinct, not spoons. Oats, a pinch of salt, water from the last burl. The pot hissed as steam rose. 5 bowls. 1 pot. Her eyes flicked to the 6th bowl she'd laid out instinctively, the new problem on the ranch. Jack Colton. Out back. He was already working. The creak of a shovel, the groan of stubborn earth. She heard it with every swing. He hadn't knocked, hadn't said a word when he rose at dawn, just walked through her yard like it belonged to him. Which, on paper, it did. She sighed. The front door creaked. Samuel, tall for 13, stepped in with a glare burning in his storm-gray eyes. His shoulders were too square for his age. That boy carried too much in his chest already. "He's fixing the fence," Samuel announced, jaw tight. "Just helping himself like he owns the place." "He does," Eleanor said softly, without turning. Samuel scoffed, voice low and bitter. "He doesn't belong here. We do." The others filtered in, Jamie tugging at a too-short shirt, Ruthie rubbing her eyes, Ben carrying an empty pail from the well. Grace, the eldest girl, set the table without being asked. They all sat, but no one touched the food, because Jack Colton stepped in. He filled the doorway with his broad shoulders, face unreadable under stubble and sun. "Smells good," he muttered. Eleanor looked up, tense but polite. "There's enough for everyone." "Barely." Jack tipped his hat off and stepped inside like he was entering a stranger's church. He took the sixth bowl, sat quietly, and didn't say grace, just ate slow and deliberate. Samuel didn't touch his food. Just stared. Jack noticed. "Problem, boy?" "That ain't your seat," Samuel shot back. "Isn't." Eleanor corrected reflexively. Jack placed his spoon down and leaned back. "Your mother invited me. She didn't mean it." "I heard her just fine." Samuel rose. "We don't need your help." "You do," Jack said, calm but firm. "That fence won't hold another storm. The roof's leaking, and your corn's been eaten down to the stalks." "And what, you're gonna fix it?" Samuel challenged. "Just like that? Why? 'Cause you paid $1? Jack's jaw flexed. "No," he said slowly. "Because I ain't the kind of man who kicks a widow and 5 kids out onto the road yet." The room went still. Eleanor set her spoon down. "Enough, both of you." Samuel hesitated, then sat again, eyes still burning. Jack stood, finished his bowl in silence, and left the same way he came in. Later that day, Eleanor found Jack in the barn, or what was left of it. He'd propped up the east wall using a fence post and rope. His shirt was soaked through with sweat, and his hat hung off a nail. "You really plan on fixing this place?" she asked, arms folded. Jack kept hammering. "It's mine, isn't it? According to paper, but not to heart." Jack stopped and looked at her. "What's that supposed to mean?" She stepped into the light. "We bled for this land. Buried my husband behind that sycamore. I taught my kids to walk in this yard. We went hungry so the soil could be turned." "That mean nothing to you?" Jack leaned against the frame. "It means everything, but this place, it was abandoned. Only because we ran out of choices," he sighed. "You've got grit. I'll give you that. But I won't be run off by a woman with 5 hungry mouths and a haunted house." She smirked, despite herself. "Haunted?" He nodded toward the broken loft. "Pretty sure I saw a raccoon up there with murder in its eyes." She actually laughed, a soft sound, barely more than breath. "I can't stay forever," she said. Sobering. "Neither can I," he replied. "But we're both here now." They stood in silence, the wind tugging at the roof. "All right," she finally said. "We share the work, but no promises. You don't own me, and I don't owe you." "Fair enough," Jack said. He extended a rough, calloused hand. She looked at it for a long moment, then shook it. An unspoken agreement was born. Over the next week, the ranch became something else, something between ruin and resurrection. Jack repaired fence posts while the boys hauled wood. Eleanor patched the roof with Grace and Ruthie, while Jack showed Jamie how to tie knots tight enough to hold through wind. Meals were shared, but not words. Not many. At least. Samuel kept his distance, his suspicion. He watched Jack like a hawk, waiting for him to falter, to leave, to take what he wanted and vanish like the rest of the world had. One evening, Jack came in covered in dirt and blood. "What happened?" Eleanor gasped. "Barbed wire got frisky," he muttered, lifting his shirt to reveal a deep cut across his side. Eleanor guided him to a chair and fetched her sewing kit. As she stitched the wound, the kids watched from the doorway, quiet, wide-eyed. "You've done this before," Jack muttered. "My husband was a drunk before he was a farmer," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Lots of practice." Jack said nothing, but something shifted in him. A quiet understanding. She wrapped the bandage tight. "You'll be sore. Don't be a fool about it." "I'm always a fool," he whispered. She raised a brow. "Well, at least you're honest." On the 10th night, a stranger rode into town. He stepped off a black horse and approached the saloon, where gossip hung thicker than smoke. "Looking for Jack Colton," he said. The barkeep pointed toward the old ranch. "Poor soul bought the devil's land," he said with a shake of his head. The stranger smiled. "Perfect. Back on the ranch." Eleanor sat outside the house, sewing by lamplight. Jack whittled something on the porch steps, some kind of toy. Samuel approached. "What are you making?" Jack looked up. "A horse, for Ruthie." Samuel crossed his arms. "She likes stars, not horses." Jack adjusted the carving. "Then maybe I'll carve a moon instead." Samuel lingered. "You're not staying," he finally said. "People don't stay." Jack looked at him hard. "Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But while I'm here, I work. I fix. I protect. That's more than most." Samuel didn't reply. He just walked away. But the next morning, he helped Jack carry wood without being asked. A start. A slow one. But a start. And high above, in the rustling cottonwoods, the wind whispered promises neither man nor boy could hear. Yet, because the land was choosing, and it wasn't finished speaking. The days had a rhythm now not quite smooth, not quite easy, but familiar. Like a pair of old boots, worn, sometimes uncomfortable, but dependable. At sunrise, Jack Colton was always the first one out. He'd walk the perimeter of the ranch alone. Rifle slung across his back, jaw set like the edge of a plow. The earth was still rough in places, and the fences were barely holding. But it was better than it was 2 weeks ago. Eleanor watched from the porch each morning, her coffee cooling in her hands, her eyes tracing his every step. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it wasn't suspicion anymore, either. The children had adjusted in their own quiet ways. Ruthie now ran barefoot to Jack when she saw him return from town, tugging at his pant leg to ask about the badger on the hill or the singing bird in the barn. Jack, gruff as ever, would grunt a response, but he always answered her. Jamie followed him around like a shadow, asking questions no one had ever bothered to answer. Why do horses sleep standing up? What's the fastest way to rope a calf? Does the moon follow us, or do we follow it? Grace, the eldest girl, baked cornbread one evening and quietly set a small loaf on Jack's side of the table. Without a word, Ben had stopped hiding under the table at mealtime. Even Samuel, the boy who still met Jack's gaze like it was a duel, had begun to mimic his movements, standing the same way at the fence line, tying the same knots, learning to swing a hammer. But words between Eleanor and Jack remained sparse, practical, measured, like two people building something too fragile to name. One afternoon, Jack found Eleanor out near the garden patch, her sleeves rolled, face streaked with dirt. The soil was fighting back, dry and unyielding. "You're planting too early," he said. "I know," she replied, not looking up. "But hope doesn't follow rules." Jack crouched beside her. "You've got grit, I'll give you that." She paused in her digging. "Is that your way of flirting, Mr. Colton?" Jack gave a half smile. "If it is, I'm terrible at it." She allowed herself a small laugh, just enough to shake the dust from the air between them. They worked side by side for a while, no words needed. And in that silence, something else grew, something quieter than corn, but rooted just as deep. That evening, a heavy sky rolled over the ranch. Gray clouds stacked like boulders, and the air turned still. Too still. Jack knew storms. This wasn't just rain. This was trouble. He found Samuel on the roof, hammering a loose shingle. "Off. Now." Jack barked. "But I'm almost now." The boy climbed down just as the first wind howled across the field like a banshee. Eleanor rushed to gather the younger kids inside. Grace shuttered the windows. Jack and Samuel secured the barn doors with rope and boards, even as dust kicked into their faces, and then the sky cracked open. Rain fell sideways. The roof groaned. A shutter tore loose and slammed against the wall. Inside the house, Jamie screamed. Ruthie cried. Ben clung to his mother's waist. "We're all right, Eleanor," whispered over and over. "We're all right, babies. We're all right." But then they heard it. a high-pitched whinny from the corral. "The pony!" Ruthie sobbed. "You forgot to tie her." Before Eleanor could stop her, the little girl darted outside into the storm. "Ruthie!" Jack didn't hesitate. He was through the door and into the rain in a heartbeat, boots sinking in mud, hat ripped from his head. The wind tore at his coat. Branches whipped past him like blades. He found her in the open field, struggling against the gale, crying as she chased the spooked pony along the fence line. Jack scooped her up just as lightning split the sky behind them, illuminating everything in stark white. He shielded her with his body and ran back toward the house, every step fighting the storm's pull. Eleanor flung the door open, her face pale, arms out. Jack handed Ruthie into her trembling embrace. "You crazy, stubborn little girl," Eleanor whispered, burying her face in her daughter's soaked hair. Jack stood dripping at the doorway, chest heaving, eyes locked on Eleanor's for a long moment. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking. Jack simply nodded, then turned and went back into the rain. There was still the barn to check. Later, when the storm passed and the house was quiet, Jack sat alone outside with a blanket over his shoulders, watching the sky turn silver. Eleanor came to him with a cup of coffee and set it beside him without a word. She sat beside him, shoulder just inches away, staring at the wreckage-broken fence rails, a torn-up garden, shingles on the ground. "Could've lost her," she said quietly, "but you didn't." She turned to him. "Why did you go after her like that?" Jack took a slow sip. "Because if I didn't, and something happened to her, I'd never be able to stay here." "Not after that. You really want to stay?" she asked. "I'm starting to think this place is worth it," she smiled faintly. "Even with 5 kids and one who looks at you like you stole his boots?" Jack chuckled. "Especially with them," Eleanor exhaled, her breath rising in the cold air. "I never wanted help," she said, "and I never wanted company. Yet here we are." They both looked toward the horizon where dawn was beginning to glow. Days passed. Then a letter arrived. Jack found it nailed to the gatepost one morning. No name, just a folded envelope with his name scratched across the front. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "This land ain't yours, Colton. You'll know it when we come to collect. Enjoy your stay while it lasts." No signature, just a smear of black ink in the shape of a half moon. Jack stared at the paper for a long time. Chill went through him that had nothing to do with the wind. Burned the letter in the fire that night, but the image stayed in his mind. Eleanor noticed his silence but didn't press. She just handed him a plate at supper and sat beside him like always. He didn't tell her not yet. She had enough to worry about. But he started sleeping lighter. Started keeping a loaded rifle beside the bed. Started walking the perimeter twice. He didn't believe in ghosts, but this land, this life, was haunted all the same. Not by spirits, by men. And Jack Colton knew all too well. The worst monsters always walked on 2 feet. The ranch stood quiet in the golden stillness of late afternoon. The wind, usually busy at that hour, had dropped to nothing. Not even a leaf stirred on the cottonwoods by the creek. Eleanor May Harper stood at the edge of her little garden patch, hands on her hips, staring at rows of sprouting promise. Beans, squash, corn. There was life again in the soil. Despite everything, her youngest, Ruthie, skipped between rows, her tiny hands dirty from helping. Jack had carved her a little wooden bird the night before. She clutched it now like treasure. Inside the house, Grace kneaded dough while Jamie peeled potatoes. Eleanor could hear them laughing, real laughter, not the strained kind they used to share before the ranch started feeling like a home again. Out by the barn, Jack was training Ben and Samuel how to reinforce fence lines. Samuel still didn't say much, but he listened now. He followed instructions. And though he hadn't yet smiled in Jack's presence, the fire in his eyes had softened to a flicker. But in the stillness, Jack knew something was wrong. He stood beside the fence and stared across the prairie. His gut twisted not with fear, but with that old soldier's instinct he thought he'd buried years ago. That silence. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. Storms never announce themselves with thunder. They begin with silence so deep it aches. In your bones. He dropped the hammer in his hand. Boys, he said. Inside. Now. The first crack of thunder rolled in like distant cannon fire. The sun disappeared behind a wall of clouds that crept over the plains like an army. Eleanor's breath caught as the wind returned, not playful now, but sharp and electric. She ran to the porch. Inside. Everyone now. Jack helped the boys carry tools to the barn before yanking the doors shut with rope and wire. The air turned coppery, ominous, the kind of air that made horses buck and children cry. The sky darkened to a bruised purple. Lightning danced across the horizon in jagged lines, illuminating the ranch in brief, strobing flashes. Inside the house, the children huddled under quilts while Eleanor sealed the shutters. Jack pushed the last chair against the door and sat with his rifle laid across his knees. Then came the rain, angry, slamming the windows like fists. The wind howled, and the house groaned under its weight. Boards creaked. Nails screamed. Ruthie clutched her bird tighter. Mama, will it take the house away? No, baby, Eleanor whispered, pulling her close. Not this house, not tonight. Jack didn't speak. He stood slowly and walked to the back room where the corner of the roof had leaked last week. He stared at it now as it swelled, creaked, and then collapsed in a burst of dust and rainwater. Eleanor rushed in. What happened? Roof gave, Jack said grimly. We'll need to move the children. That corner's not safe. He grabbed spare blankets and started piling them near the hearth. Eleanor herded the children one by one. The fire sputtered. In the stone fireplace, struggling against the damp air. It was then, through the storm's rage, they heard a scream, faint, high-pitched. Then again, Ruthie. Eleanor's heart stopped. The little girl was gone. The door was cracked open. Wind howled through it like laughter. Jack was already moving. Outside, the storm hit him like a wall. Rain blinded him. Wind pushed him sideways and mud clawed at his boots. He cupped his mouth with a hand. Ruthie. He bellowed. No answer. A flash of lightning revealed a figure, small, barefoot, sprinting toward the corral. The pony. She'd gone after the pony. Jack cursed under his breath, sprinting. His body remembered what to do. He moved low, fast, calculated, the way he had in wars far from here. He caught her just as a gust lifted her feet from the ground. She screamed. He grabbed her, wrapped his coat around her body, and crouched low. Pony galloped past them, crazed and wide-eyed. Jack didn't chase it. He turned toward the house. The return felt endless. Every step a fight. Rain burned his eyes. Lightning cracked again, striking a tree near the creek. Mark exploded in a burst of fire and ash. He reached the porch. Eleanor already there, soaked and frantic. She took Ruthie in her arms. The girl sobbed into her chest, arms clinging like ivy. Jack collapsed on the steps, chest heaving. I told her not to go, Eleanor whispered. She didn't listen, Jack said, but I did. She looked down at him, his shirt torn, his shoulder bleeding where a branch must have caught him. You could have been killed, she said, her voice trembling. He met her eyes. So could she. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Instead, she helped him to his feet and guided him inside. Later, the storm passed. The children fell asleep one by one, curled around the hearth like kittens. Jack sat shirtless at the table, while Eleanor cleaned his wound. He winced as she dabbed at the gash. You've done this before, she said quietly. He nodded. Too many times. She threaded the needle and began to sew. Silence. Until Eleanor asked softly, "Why did you come here?" Jack didn't answer for a while. Then, "Because I lost everything." He stared into the flames. "My wife. My boy. They died in a house fire while I was out riding for work. I got there too late. I buried them both with my own hands." Eleanor's hand trembled. Jack continued, voice rougher now. "I spent years drifting. Thought if I found a place no one wanted, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much." She paused in her stitching. "And does it?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Eleanor finished the stitch and tied it off. "My husband," she said, after a long moment. "He wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't a strong one. When the bank collapsed, he blamed himself. Got sick. Fever took him fast. I buried him in the back grove with no preacher, no marker, and 5 mouths to feed." Jack met her gaze. The flickering fire danced in her eyes. Neither spoke. Then, wordlessly, Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "No promises. No explanations. Just a moment of warmth in a cold, broken world." The next morning brought sunshine. Dew glistened on the ruined garden. The pony had returned, calmer now, grazing by the fence. The children emerged sleepy-eyed, blinking in the light, and Jack stood by the porch with Eleanor, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her face unreadable. He handed her a crumpled letter. She read it in silence, her fingers clenched. "Clayton." "Reeves," she said. "You know him?" "He's the one my husband feared," she whispered. "The one who said we didn't belong here." "The one who tried to take it before?" Jack nodded. "He wants it back. We won't give it." Jack looked out across the land. Not at the fences, not at the fields, but at the house, the children inside it, and the woman beside him. "No," he said, "we won't." The wind stirred again, not wild this time, but steady, like something waking up. Like the land itself was listening, and perhaps it was, because Jack Colton wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was a guardian, and the storm wasn't over. It only just begun. The skies above the ranch had cleared, but the air was heavy, like something was holding its breath. Jack Colton stood on the ridge that morning, his eyes scanning the distant horizon where the prairie met the sky. Eleanor stood behind him, arms folded across her chest, the wind catching strands of her dark hair. "You think he's coming today?" she asked. Jack didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on a dark speck far away. A cloud of dust, too small to be weather, too slow to be wind. "Yeah," he said finally, "he's coming." Down below, the children moved like whispers, quiet, obedient. They'd been warned. Samuel checked the barn doors again. Grace ushered Ruthie and Jamie inside. Ben carried firewood to the kitchen like a soldier on patrol. Jack turned to Eleanor. "We have until noon at best." She didn't flinch. "Then let's finish what we started." Together they moved fast. The old windows were reinforced with extra boards. The barn was locked tight. The horses hidden in the western ravine. Buckets of water were filled and placed near the porch in case of fire. Jack handed Eleanor one of his spare rifles and 2 boxes of cartridges. "You know how to use it?" he asked. She cocked it expertly. "I was a ranch wife in the dust wars. I had to shoot snakes and starving men off my porch more than once." Jack gave a grim smile. "Good." Samuel approached, fists clenched. "Give me a gun." Jack eyed him. "You ever fired one?" "No, but I can learn." Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but Jack stopped her with a glance. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small revolver. Not much stopping power, but enough. "Stay by the barn," Jack said. "Don't try to be a hero." "I'm not," Samuel said. "But I'm not hiding either." Jack handed him the pistol, and for the first time since they met, the boy looked. him in the eye, and nodded like a man. By late morning, the dust cloud had grown. 7 riders. Black horses, long coats. One man at the front with a wide-brimmed hat and a red scarf blowing in the wind. Clayton Reeves, land baron, killer in a suit. A man who never did his own dirty work because he never had to. Jack stood on the porch, rifle in hand, coat unbuttoned, boots planted. Eleanor stood beside him. Not behind. Beside. The riders came close and stopped in a line just outside the fence line. Clayton dismounted. A polished boot touched the ground like it didn't belong in dirt. He removed his gloves slowly, as if the whole thing bored him. "Well?" "Jack Colton," he said with a sulky voice. "I didn't think you'd be fool enough to stay." Jack didn't blink. "You thought wrong." Clayton chuckled. "Paper don't mean much out here. I had my name on this land long before your dollar ever touched a desk. I've got the deed," Jack said, "signed by the state. You want it, you can challenge it in court." Clayton smiled. "Court's 200 miles from here. And I don't have the patience." He stepped forward, but Eleanor raised the rifle. "One more step," she said, "and you'll lose a toe." Clayton glanced at her, amused. "Ah, the widow. Still playing settler, I see." "I'm not playing," she said. "This is my land, too." Clayton spread his arms. "You think this ragged house and patch of dirt is worth dying for?" Jack lowered his rifle slightly, not out of fear, but to speak clearly. "No," he said, "it's worth living for." The standoff stretched like taut rope. Clayton turned to his men. "Burn it." One of them pulled a flask from his coat, struck a match. Jack fired first. The man dropped before the flame reached the bottle. The others scattered, guns drawn. Eleanor fired next, shattering the reins of a nearby horse, sending it galloping into chaos. Samuel, from behind the barn, popped off 2 shots, his hands shaking but determined. Clayton dove for cover. It wasn't a long battle. Jack moved like lightning, picking targets with deadly precision. Eleanor reloaded with practiced speed. Samuel wounded one man in the leg, and the others began retreating. Clayton, bleeding from a shoulder graze, mounted his horse with a furious scream. "You think you've won?" he shouted. "This ain't over." Jack raised his rifle, but Eleanor put a hand on his arm. "Let him go," she said. Jack hesitated, then lowered the weapon. Clayton rode off with his men, the dust of their retreat trailing behind them like shame. Afterward, silence. Real silence, the kind that meant safety. Eleanor slumped onto the porch, breathing hard, the rifle still in her lap. Jack stood over her, scanning the horizon, just to be sure. Samuel emerged from the barn, face pale but proud. Ben and Jamie ran from the house. "We did it!" Jamie cried. "Mama, we did it!" Ruthie wrapped her arms around Jack's leg. "You're our hero!" Jack knelt and picked her up, hugging her tightly. "No," he whispered. "You're mine." That night the townsfolk came, one by one. On foot, on wagons. They'd heard the shots. They'd seen the smoke. And when they saw that Jack Colton and Eleanor Harper had stood their ground against Reeves, against hired guns, against fear, they stepped forward, one by one. "I've got nails and boards," one man said. "Let's rebuild that roof." "I can bring seed," said another. "My daughter can teach the little ones," said a schoolmarm. The town, once silent, now stood behind them. The ranch was no longer an island. It was a beacon. A week later, the sheriff arrived with official documents. Reeves had been arrested for land fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. His empire was collapsing. Jack signed the final deed with Eleanor's name beside his, not because she asked. Because he insisted. "You've earned it," he said. She smiled. "So have you." And in the courthouse that day, 2 names once broken, once alone stood side by side. Colton, Together the land had chosen, and it chose them. The summer sun poured over the prairie like golden honey, stretching long shadows across the hills and painting every blade of grass with warmth. The ranch, once worn and empty, now stood strong boards straightened, windows polished, the roof freshly patched and painted with white lime and pride. The windmill turned again. The well was deeper now. The garden flourished with tomatoes, corn, squash, and promise. But the biggest change wasn't in the land. It was in the people. Jack Colton no longer woke alone. He stirred each morning to the scent of biscuits rising in the oven, the sound of Eleanor's voice humming in the kitchen, and the thud of young feet racing through the wooden floors above. The children no longer watched him with caution. Jamie now dragged Jack by the sleeve to show him his latest drawing. Grace brought her mended dresses for his approval. Ben asked to ride beside him when he checked the fence line. Ruthie insisted he carry her like a sack of potatoes until both of them fell into a heap of giggles, and Samuel proud. Quiet Samuel now stood tall by Jack's side, helping with chores, reading from old books Jack kept in his trunk, and taking lessons on how to load and clean a rifle. He never asked for praise. He didn't need to. He had Jack's respect. The town of Dry Creek was different too. Once half forgotten. Now it thrived again. Men came back with their families. The saloon quieted. The church reopened its doors. Children played in the streets. Trade wagons rolled through every week, and the general store was restocked with more than just dust and beans, and folks always nodded when Jack and Eleanor rode in together, sometimes side by side, sometimes with one of the children perched between them. A whisper started, "That's their land now. That's their family." No longer the widow with too many children. No longer the drifter who paid $1 for ghosts. They were the heart of the valley now. And nobody questioned it. One evening, under the cottonwood trees where Eleanor's late husband rested, Jack knelt and placed a hand on the grave. He didn't speak for long. Just a few quiet words. "Thank you," he said, "for holding on long enough to give them a chance. I'll carry it from here." Eleanor stood nearby, watching, her heart heavy but grateful. She stepped forward, took his hand, and they stood together, old pain in the soil beneath them, new life in the sky above. Weeks turned to months. The seasons rolled forward. Snow dusted the barn roof by December. Jack showed the children how to make traps for rabbits. They laughed when Jamie fell face first into the snow, and Eleanor warmed cider on the stove while Ruthie sang songs in her tiny voice. At night, they gathered by the fire. Stories were shared. Wounds remembered. Dreams whispered aloud. Jack, once silent, now laughed more, smiled more, loved more. He told the children tales of faraway deserts, mountains so tall they swallowed clouds, and soldiers who played harmonica instead of shooting rifles. "Will you ever leave again?" Ruthie asked one night, her head resting on his lap. Jack looked at her, his eyes soft. "Not unless you send me away." "You're not allowed," she said. "You're ours now." He nodded. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." Spring came again, and on a soft April morning, the house was filled with music, not from a piano or a fiddle, but from the voices of friends. Townsfolk and children all gathered beneath the cottonwood trees. Eleanor wore a cream-colored dress sewn by Grace. Her hands trembled just a little, but her smile did on single quotes. Jack stood in his best shirt, hair slicked back, nervous as a colt. His coat still smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. His hands were rough but clean. They spoke their vows beneath a hand-built arch, made of fallen branches and wildflowers. No preacher, no fancy ceremony, just promises spoken plain and true. "I don't promise you perfection," Jack said. "Only that I'll never walk away again." Eleanor smiled through tears. "And I promise to make this ranch a home not just for our children, but for your heart." And with a kiss, Two broken stories became one. That night, under the stars, Jack sat on the porch steps with Samuel beside him. "You sure you're okay with all this?" Jack asked, handing the boy a tin cup of cider. Samuel stared out across the land, the same land that had once felt like a battlefield but now felt like a fortress. "You didn't replace him," the boy said, "but you stood in the gap. That matters." Jack nodded, swallowing the emotion rising in his throat. "You've got a place here, Samuel," he said, "not just as a son, but as a man." The boy gave a small, tight smile. "Good, because I ain't going nowhere." The stars overhead sparkled like silver sparks tossed from God's own forge, and the wind, soft and steady, carried the scent of earth, hope, and home. Years passed. The ranch grew. More fields. More animals. More laughter. Eleanor taught school in town once a week. Grace became a midwife. Ben raised goats. Jamie learned the guitar and sang to the crops like it made them grow better. Ruthie wrote poems on barn walls, and Samuel he became. The heart of the ranch, strong and steady. He married a girl from Dry Creek and built a second house just down the hill. Jack and Eleanor never left. They didn't have to. They had found everything they'd been missing in that old, broken down ranch no one wanted. It had cost Jack $1, but it gave him everything. The end.